morning, everybody. I feel very honored, and it's my great pleasure this morning to introduce to you the first skilled speaker of SILS 33, Professor Thomas, who is a research, a very renowned linguist and a research associate at the University of London, and he is also working as a consultant with SIL, SIL, which is an international institution where they work for preserving languages, as you might know. Professor Payne's main professional interest is in facilitating the preparation of descriptive materials for any language of the world, like grammars, dictionaries, and text collections. And that's actually also my own interest in working on promotion languages. So that's why I feel so much honored today. He was all about his work called Describing the Syntax, a guide for fluent English. If you have not read his book, I would really recommend you this book. It provides a lot of material for anybody interested in writing a grammar description for any language. When you look at it, it's very clear. You can do some follow-up reading. It's really very interesting. Professor Penn was also reading different grammars on various languages. He has been working on Russian, Indian, and also, of course, I have forgotten. Today's talk is going to focus on the Philippine language called Waray. So the title of this talk is going to be I'm going to tell you this talk. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I appreciate the invitation. This is actually the first SEALs that I've been to. I'm a descriptive linguist, a typologist. I work in many different parts of the world. But at present, I'm concentrating on languages of the Philippines. I've got 2 co-authored grammars in process, one in Cagayanan that should be coming out Language Science Press, and another one co-authored with Dr. Voltaire OYZON, who's here with us today, on Waray. And this paper is a co-authored paper, and we're looking forward to your comments and your suggestions. It's a basic descriptive study based on what we consider to be a communicative approach to grammar. Okay. This is the whole paper is available if you want to download it. This is not the title page, this is just the download page. And I'm going to move right along to the paper itself. Okay. Okay. So this is what we consider to be a communicative approach. I've heard it recently called a usage-based approach. It begins with the rather audacious assumption that language exists to allow people to communicate with one another. And as such, it is shaped by the perspectives, the cultures, the histories of people speak the language. Language arises organically within human communities. For some reason, I'm not seeing my notes here, but that's okay. As usual, there are technical deficiencies. That should Okay. All right. Okay, so I guess I'm not going to be able to use this, which is going to be confusing to me. I hope it's not confusing to others. Okay, so this is kind of an outline of what the talk will be about. First, I'll give a little bit of demographic information about Waray. Then we'll talk about the difference between conceptual or semantic transitivity and grammatical transitivity. Okay, and we use the orthographic convention of capitalizing transitivity and transitive and intransitive when we're talking about grammatical transitivity, and not capitalizing transitive, intransitive, transitivity when we're talking about conceptual or semantic transitivity. And this will be a very important distinction that I want to emphasize throughout the talk. Then I'll just give a couple of slides on the basic clause structure of Waray. Then we'll talk about, I'll try to convince you that grammatical transitivity is an inflectional category in Waray words. Then we'll start talking about construction types that either mitigate, that is, reduce in a subtle way the semantic transitivity of a clause, and then constructions that augment or add to the basic transitivity of the clause. Detransitive constructions, applicative constructions. And then, if there's time, we'll do some conclusions having to do with the impact of this approach, this rather audacious approach to clause structure in a Philippine language for language typology as a whole. Okay, demographics of Waray. Here's a map of the Philippines. The Waray area is circled in red with the major dialects divided by the yellow lines, if you can see those. This is the Eastern Visayas region of the Philippines, region 8 it's called. There's about 3 million speakers, 3 million plus speakers of some variety of Waray. And data from this paper come from northern Leyte, all right? So the lower left, the lower left part of that red quad there. And here's some pictures of some folks that, where most of this research was done was in Tacloban City at Leyte Normal University. And these are some of the students preparing to be teachers at Leyte Normal University. Some of these folks contributed their opinions, their perspectives on this research. This is just a view of some of the geography of the area. This is the strait between Samar and Leyte. Okay, conceptual, semantic transitivity, and grammatical transitivity. And this paper is about grammatical constructions that address the conceptual or semantic domain of transitivity. The key word in semantic or conceptual transitivity is perspective. We're not talking about reality necessarily. We're talking about the images, the concepts that people have in mind when they're in communication with other people, right? So we'll be using terms like scene and perspective as ways of referring to the content of linguistic messages. All right? And what's fascinating about linguistics, what got me involved in linguistics or descriptive linguistics, it's more specifically, is to see how individual languages address the conceptual domains that we try to communicate with in our speech. Okay, and I want to stress this distinction between semantic transitivity and grammatical transitivity. So conceptual or semantic transitivity is based on a very general cognitive schema defined by Mark Johnson in 1990 as the path schema. Okay, so here we have a diagram of path schema. Some of these things are on your handout. You should have a handout. The reason I passed out the handout, or I wanted you to have the handout, was so you could refer back to some of these figures. Not all the data is there in the handout, but you may have cause to look at some of those charts and figures there. Okay, so the path schema consists of three parts: a starting point or source, a path, and an endpoint or a goal. And so you've got X moving to Y, okay, A moving to B on this page. The path schema is universal in a very general way because it's useful, right? It's useful for people as they try to make sense of their surroundings. It can be used as a way of conceptualizing or developing an image of things like throwing a ball or telling somebody something, telling a story, anything that involves causation and effect can be conceptualized in terms of a schema such as path. Okay? However, its expression in individual human languages varies widely, and this is what's exciting about linguistics, right? You get to see how different languages approach the universal conceptual domains that people need to talk about when they're communicating with each other. Now, this notion of semantic or conceptual transitivity is useful, but it's not unidimensional. Okay? You can't just put the degree of transitivity on a unidimensional scale. Rather, it involves a complex of semantic dimensions. And that complex is given in Table 1 on your handout. Each of which is defined in terms of high versus low transitivity. These are the semantic, what you see on your handout there, and that is called Table 1. These are the features that we see as motivating grammatical transitivity. So these are the content features that give rise to the grammatical features that we see as what we call transitivity. There's the chart, which is I'm not going to be able to cover all of those. In fact, I'm only going to talk about one or two things on there, but I think you'll get a picture of what we're talking about when we talk about grammatical transitivity. Okay, so this goes back to a great teacher of mine, Tom Givon, in 1979. He made this statement that grammar discretizes semantics. Well, what did he mean by that? Well, semantics, meaning, is continuously variable, right? There's no inherent categorization in many semantic domains. Grammar comes along and makes structure out of continuously variable semantic space. Okay, so the human mind is incredible, okay, amazingly complex, but it's not capable of dealing with infinite variability very well. Okay? And it is finite. It's incredibly complex, but it's finite. Right? And so when confronted with semantic spaces in the scenes, the perspectives that the people are trying to communicate, they've got to make categories. Grammar is the tool that languages use to make categories out of semantic space. For example, the color spectrum is, prototypical example of a semantic space that's continuously variable. There's no inherent categories in the color spectrum, right? But languages come along and they make categories out of that space. We have lexical terms like red, blue, orange, green, etc. They kind of carve out categories in that space which is not inherently in itself categorized. This is what grammar does as well. And what I'm saying, the basic assumption of this approach is that transitivity itself is variable in this multidimensional scalar way, but languages come along and make structure out of that in different ways. Okay, so I want to claim that clause structure of Waray is highly sensitive to the notion of semantic transitivity. There's a distinction between transitive and intransitive, and notice the capital letters there, talking about grammar here, in inflectional verbal morphology. Now, linguists are not used to talking about transitivity as an inflectional category. Why? Well, I would say it's because most languages that linguists study aren't sensitive to transitivity in the verbal morphology. Inflection is not a category in the European languages and many other languages in the world, but it is in Waray. And it's not particularly hard to find examples of languages that do reflect grammatical transitivity in the verb morphology. It's not unheard of. It's not unreasonable for inflection to express transitive versus intransitive values. Okay, so this is a two-way distinction. It's like a switch, right? It's either, any clause is either transitive or intransitive. Structure, it's a neural motor pattern that exists in the grammar of the language, which means it exists in the minds of speakers. And various additional, in addition to this transitive intransitive switch that occurs in the verb morphology, various additional features of Waray clause structure mitigate, that is, turn down or augment, turn up, the semantic transitivity of the scene they're trying to express. And I hope to convince you of that in this talk. And this, we'd like to suggest, is the essence of the famous Philippine voice system. Okay, moving along to the basic clause structure of Waray. Keep track of my time here. You can see I'm already behind schedule. Intransitive clauses. We take the view that the basic clause structure is ergative absolutive. You have intransitive clauses with absolutive only arguments. The absolutive case third person singular pronoun here, and the absolutive case prenominal particle an. In this example, the child smiled, he or she smiled. Okay, that's intransitive. And in the transitive constructions, you have the an, the absolutive prenominal particle on the undergoer, right? And you get that same absolutive third person singular pronoun on the undergoer. And then you get a different marker, the han, prenominal marker for the actor participle that's happening in the transitive construction. That's the basic clause structure. Now, you'll notice that the marking on the verb is different in these two. You've got an in those examples, and you've got a in the other ones. There. And what we'd like to claim is that the is one of the intransitive markers. Okay? It marks grammatical intransitivity, And "ing," on the other hand, marks grammatical transitivity. Okay, so here is our current chart. This is according to our current analysis. Okay? And up for grabs, whatever, of the inflectional affixation in Waray. This is inflection, and what makes this, these affixes distinct is that they form a paradigm, right? Paradigm is something that basic descriptive linguistic notion. You've got a list of forms, one and only one of which must be chosen for a particular category. Right? So you've got inflected verb, you've got verbs that express actions, activities. We're not talking about nonverbal predicates, we're talking about verbal predicates. I've got to have one of these and can only have one of these. Can't have two of them, can't stack them. And what this means is that zero can be a member of the category, can be a meaningful member, right? Because if you leave one of these out, you've got a conspicuous absence of something, right? And that conspicuous absence can then serve as the exponent for some particular value in the system. Now, this paradigm contrasts with another larger set of affixes, which we call stem forming. Right? Stem forming affixes are ones that are totally optional, don't have to choose one. They're available and they can be stacked. You can have two or three of them or up to five. I think I have an example here of 5 on a particular verb. And when you have non-paradigmatic morphology like that, then zero just means we've chosen one. It doesn't have it can't serve as a value of a particular category, right? It's just the absence of any specific stem forming affixation. And yeah, this is just, this is claiming, this slide just shows what I just said. One of these affixes must occur, and they cannot combine with one another, and they express a coherent array of values. And in our current analysis, those values are transitivity. See, transitivity as one, those are the columns there. And modality, these are the rows. Okay? You've got realis, irrealis as the biggest distinction in modality, and then some other smaller distinctions within the realis, irrealis. Okay. Now the other set of affixes, the larger set of affixes in Waray, are what we're calling stem forming. And they are optional. Okay? A simple root can function as a stem. Okay? You don't need to have any of these stem forming affixes. Several may combine to form a complex stem, and they express a number of unrelated values like valence, you've got causatives, reciprocals, applicatives, aspect, you have iterative and completive, modal categories like deliberate and abilitative, actional type or action, interaction, associative, etc. Now here's an example from a text just illustrating the different types of morphology that we have in Waray. So everything within the square brackets is what we would call the stem. Okay, you have the root here, which is purod, meaning to cut down trees. Then you've got a pluractional, homorganic or a nasal that assimilates to the P, and then the P drops out, right? And then you've got the hung, which we're calling infinitive in this example. You've got an in repetitive. This isn't the in transitive verb marker, but it's a stem forming. And what this means is that she's doing it with repetitive motions, okay? And then you've got this incompletive, meaning it's ongoing, it's something she's still doing. And then you have this deliberate modality, she's doing it on purpose, it's not something she's just accidentally doing. And then you've got the inflection. It's inflected as intransitive and realis. Okay. All right, so that's just an example of the kind of structure we see in Waray verbs. Okay, so now I want to try to convince you that this transitive-intransitive distinction is what I say it is. It's transitive versus intransitive, okay? So there's three different, of the many verb classes in Waray, there are three classes that I want to talk about as intransitive roots, patient-preserving labile roots, and agent-preserving labile roots. Intransitive roots are those that may not occur in a transitive inflection. They may not take transitive inflection without some kind of valence increasing stem-forming affix, like positive or implicative. Okay? They only occur inflected in an intransitive way. And to me, that's the biggest piece of evidence that that marker is a marker of intransitivity. You have unquestionably semantically intransitive concepts, right? Concepts that don't evoke that path schema, right? They don't evoke a schema of starting point, path, and end point. Just one person standing there dancing. That's possible schema evoked by this verb. To smile, to laugh, there's no transfer of activity there. To stand up, to walk. Okay, these are the kinds of concepts that don't involve transfer of energy from a starting point to an end point. And all of those, and many others, by the way, these are just representative, do not take transitive inflection without having some kind of derivational or stem-forming morphology associated with them. These other two classes, however, can take both transitive and intransitive inflection, depending on the perspective of the speaker. But for the patient-preserving labile roots, the transitive inflection is going to give you the causative. You don't need a causative morpheme. You don't need the pa. Many of you who work on Austronesian are aware of the pa prefix that makes causative. You don't need a pa on any of these verbs to make them transitive. We'll see some examples here in a minute. So when they're intransitive, it's the undergoer, it's the patient that is the absolute. Okay. Now, these over here, these are agent-preserving labile roots. They also can occur in both transitive and intransitive inflections. But for these, the intransitive form is the actor, the controller, the starting point of the activity. Okay. And we'll see examples of each. Okay, unquestionably intransitive roots, like sayao, to dance, take intransitive inflection. Here's a couple of examples of that. Lilia danced on stage, that's an optional logative adjunct. And these are just illustrates the difference between deliberate modality with a G there and what we're calling controlled modality with a O. Okay, so controlled modality just means she did it as expected. It's not something unusual or remarkable in any way. Whereas with the G, it means she deliberately did that. Right? She did it on purpose and calling attention to that some way by putting that G in there. You can't really put this into a transitive frame, okay, with the in transitive marker. If you do, it's understood to be a truncated form of an applicative. Okay, so if you get this meaning, someone danced with Lilia, notice that's not the causative. It doesn't mean somebody caused Lilia to dance. So it's not in the category of the P-labile verbs, right? But it means there should be an E prefix on here. Ikitsayao Lilia, meaning somebody danced with her. That would be an associative applicative, and if we have time, we get to some of those. So basically, these verbs, what I'm calling intransitive verbs, unquestionably intransitive, with transitive inflection, unless they have some kind of valence increasing morphology associated with them. Okay, so here we have a sayao, the same root, but with a causative, and yeah, and then you can put the transitive mark. Okay? Intransitive root plus the causative becomes transitive, grammatically transitive. And this just illustrates the irrealis form of the same verb. Okay? Irrealis form. Now here's an applicative of that same verb, sayao. Okay? And when you put the applicative on something, now this we consider to be a stem-forming affix. Stem formative is on. Okay? Then sayawan doesn't mean to dance anymore. It means to dance on. Okay? It's a derived root, you might say, a derived stem based on the root sayao. And when you have sayawan, it becomes one of the roots that can take a transitive inflection. So then you get the in transitive, or you get the on irrealis intransitive suffix. And notice that it's the location that becomes the absolutive. Dance on the stage is now the endpoint. Now, P-labile roots, so we're talking about the center column in the list of verbs that you have there, can be either transitive, can be inflected as either transitive or intransitive, but the intransitive form is the underdoor, the P is the absolute, right? The underdoor. Okay? Now, tuna on ice cream means the ice cream melted or dissolved. And I could put tuna into a transitive inflection, a transitive case frame here, and it means causative, right? I melted the wax, okay, with the transitive marker on the verb. That's perfectly acceptable for this class of verbs. The other class of verbs, the last one, the last column in that chart illustrates alabile roots, which can also occur in either transitive or intransitive inflections. When they're inflected as a transitive frame, you get an ordinary transitive clause. Gikatwan, she ate the bread. Okay? The undergoer is in the absolutive, which is what you'd expect in a transitive construction. The actor is expressed with an ergative pronoun, and this is just an ordinary transitive clause. Deliberately, she did it on purpose. Okay? In an intransitive frame, this just means she already ate. Okay, and it's just like English. You know, if you say, "Oh, want some food?" No, I already ate. What you're saying is you're using a transitive idea. The notion of eating involves an undergoer, right? I mean, you don't have an event of eating if you don't have eater and an eaten thing, right? But what you're saying is that for my purposes, in this event, the situation I'm describing, it doesn't matter. State of being here. I already ate, so I don't need anything else. So this, in English, that construction, she already ate, he or she already ate, is in fact intransitive, grammatically intransitive. But English, like all, I would say, European languages, don't mark the difference between transitive and intransitive morphology of European languages, right? So we look at that and go, wow, that's a different voice, or it's a different something or other going on here. But if you just look at it in terms of intransitive versus transitive, it kind of solves. Okay, so some folks have called examples like 12b, intransitive version of a semantically transitive construction, anti-passive. Okay? And this is a reasonable way to look at it. I looked at our current opinion, it's not the best term to use because it implies a mirror image of a passive construction. Right? This is a term from Michael Silverstein back in 1976. He came up with the term anti-passive for languages with unquestionably verb. And the problem is that these constructions are not really very much like passives. I mean, they're not, passives are usually glaringly marked, right? And rather unusual in ordinary conversation. It's debatable, we have to do a discourse study to find out, but there's no doubt that these constructions, these what we're calling detransitive constructions, are much more common in discourse than passives typically are in active passive language. The other problem, so-called problem, is that there's no specific anti-passive morphology. There's no marker of anti-passive. There's just the intransitive marking on the verb. That's all you need. You don't need to have, as in German and other languages that have anti-passives, you don't need that in Waray because you've got this really nice system of transitive versus intransitive marking. Okay. Now, so detransitive constructions, we'd like to claim, are similar to English constructions like Peter already ate. Okay, now this isn't, a construction like Peter already ate is not derived from, I mean, I don't think anybody would say it's derived from a construction like Peter already ate my pizza, something like that. It's not like a some part of the derivational chain that starts out as grammatically transitive and becomes intransitive. Maradona kicks what? Well, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. We're talking about what he's doing and not what happens to all. This is the rather archaic English expression where you have a genitive undergoer, Mirabelle drank of the water of life, drank part of it, or something like that. Nobody would call them, maybe some people would call those anti-passives in English, but this is kind of the same function as the detransitive structures, the detransitive constructions that we're talking about in Waray. They're semantically transitive. Okay, they do have this idea of carrying over from a starting point to an end point. So they evoke that scene, but they're just a way of downplaying or hazing out, or I don't know what the term would be, expressing the idea that I'm not really talking about the undergoer, what happened to the undergoer. What's crucial here is what the actor did. And so we're talking more about the actor, or what happened to the actor than the undergoer. And the only difference is, this 8 doesn't inflect for transitivity. It's intransitive in this example, Peter already ate, but it's not inflected for intransitivity, whereas in Waray it is. Now, the undergoer in a detransitive construction may be expressed in a non-absolute role. Okay, so we have these constructions, Pedro ate duck embryo, where you can express the duck embryo, but again, you're not talking about what happened to the malut. Right? You're talking about Peter. This is something that Peter did. And so in many grammars, you see these kinds of pairs of examples where it looks like you've got 2 different markers on the verb, right? And you've got grammatical relations, han plus an, and then you just switch the grammatical relations, an nanay, han bata, and you've got 2 ways of saying the idea, of expressing the idea that the mother massaged the child. And here you're just saying something about the mother, and here you're just saying something about the child. The grammatical relations are reversed, so these are symmetrical. 2 different symmetrical transitive clauses. There's several problems with this, however. First of all, those grammatical, the grammatical relation marked by han in this example and this example are not the same. First piece of evidence is that they don't pronominalize in the same way. Okay? So the actor, when the han marked participant, hananai, in the previous example, is pronominalized, it pronominalizes as Mia. Okay? But when you have the undergoer marked with Han, you can't replace it with Mia. Okay? If you do, it only means his, her, mother massaged someone. So now this Mia here must be understood as the possessor of Nana. His, her, mother. Okay? It can't be understood as the undergoer. And if you try to move the Mia into a different position, which is normally okay with undergoers, deperspectivized or downplayed undergoers, it just becomes problematic. And there's several other pieces of information, pieces of evidence that we give in the paper. If you want to read all of that evidence, you can look at it in the paper. Can somebody tell me how much time I have? I don't know if that's 10 minutes left. Okay, good. All right. So these are, I'm not going to go through all of these, they are in the paper. Our conclusion is that detransitive constructions are grammatically intransitive, and they have all the properties of unquestionably intransitive constructions. They take intransitive inflection, and they have only one core argument. Yes. Now, in addition to this on-off distinction, transitive versus intransitive, there are also many constructions that can adjust, qualitatively adjust the transitivity. And the first type is what we see as applicative constructions. So applicative constructions are those that direct that activity, that transfer of activity, to a partially, superficially, or invisibly affected endpoint. And for example, number 25, example 25 here, directs intransitive activity to an endpoint, the stage. So the dancing is intransitive, but it's being directed toward something, namely the stage. But notice that that stage is not fully affected. It's not a patient per se, in the sense of something that undergoes a change of state as a result of this activity. But it's only superficially affected by the activity. Okay. Dance on. Notes about this. Okay. I just wanted to point out that E, the suffix E, is the subjunctive form of the duplicative an. Okay, so this is an example of the verb dara with the an in the indicative modality, you might say, and then in subjunctive context where you get subjunctive modality, what we are calling subjunctive, and not the same as the Europeans, you get an E. And that's totally regular and totally consistent. So remember those three categories, three types of verbs, right? Intransitive, labile, and alabile verbs. If you have a semantically, such as those on the left side of that chart, an applicative marker will augment the transitivity, right? Because it says that activity is being directed towards something, but it doesn't augment it all the way to highly transitive, because that thing that is affected by the activity is not fully affected. It's only affected in a superficial, invisible, or partial way. Okay? Now, when you put an applicative on a semantically transitive activity, like dara, like to give or something, it also says that the activity is directed to something that's less than fully affected, invisibly or superficially affected. And we have lots of examples of that in the paper. I'm not sure how many of these I can go through. this presentation, but there's several types of, or several usages of applicative morphology in Waray. In all of the usages, the commonality is that the absolutive is less than wholly effective. It's either partially, invisibly, it might be emotionally, experientially, but somehow not a prototypical patient, something that undergoes change of physical or some kind of state. Yeah. So extroversive applicatives, I don't think I'm going to talk much about these, but when you're talking about laundering, we would say that this is an intransitive concept. In Waray, lala means do the laundry. Okay? And you can't express that in a transitive construction. Here, you can't just make this transitive and make the close into absolute. You've got to put an applicative marker on there and say, oh, I laundered at mom's dress. Right? So I laundered mom's dress. I'm affecting it in a superficial way. I'm getting the dirt out of it. Adversative applicatives, these are really interesting. If you've got happenstantial modality and your pig dies, this is something that it just did, nobody killed it, right? Namatay and bodily, it's non-applicative. You put the applicative marker on there. Namatayan kami, so kami is us, right? Hanbabwe, so it's kind of like, you could say this is kind of like the ergative, it's the starting point, right? It's not ergative, it's not the, and we can show that it's not ergative, but it's kind of like the Babwe died and it affected us, right? Sometimes these are called dative of interest, or I don't know what else it's called, but the pig died on us. The pig died us. Partitive applicatives. Here we have two constructions where the argument structure is exactly the same in both cases, right? And but in the first one, I got all of the bread, right? And if you put the applicative on there, you still have the bread, but what this now means is I only got some of the bread, part of it. Okay? I got at the bread, let's say. Conceptualize a few sentences like that. So again, the activity is less than fully effective. It's only partially effective. And this just shows a partitive applicative with the E subjunctive in the imperative modality. You can say, I drank all of, or drink all of that. If you're telling somebody to drink all of that, you use the non-applicative a suffix. But if you want to say drink some of that, you use the applicative subjunctive suffix e. In construction that we could talk about for a long time, but again, it's like Pedro, the absolutive here. Pedro, this is the personal name form of the prenominal marker for absolutive case. Pedro is the undergoer of this transfer of activity, right? Pedro considers him her beautiful. In other words, he or she is beautiful to Pedro, right? He's affected experientially by it. He's not the patient of it. He doesn't undergo a change of state as a result of it, but he's just affected emotionally maybe by it. Now, the other applicative marker is a prefix, and this should not be confused with the suffix e, but the prefix e is what we call the applicative to marker, and what it does is it says something about the initiator of the event. Okay, so the applicative one construction, the on marker, says that this is activity directed to something that's only partially, superficially affected by the activity. Whereas the prefix e, as an applicative marker, says that the initiator of the activity does so in a less than sovereign way. In other words, it's not fully under the control of the the initiator, controller. So if you're doing something for the benefit of somebody, it's like that beneficiary is in the background motivating your activity. Right? Or if you're doing something with an instrument, I'm cutting the meat with a knife, it's like I'm acting on the knife and the knife is participating in the control of that event. And there's another use of this benefactive, so the beneficiary, so this hinanai is the beneficiary of cooking, right? With that E marker on there, it says that I cooked it, but under her influence somehow. I did it for her. Right? There's also an associative use, and this is a really great example. This Quan is the word that means whatever. Right? So this is a story about a dog that becomes a man and becomes able to speak. Right? And so the speaker, at first, doesn't really know whether to call it a dog or a man, so they use the term Quan. And this Quan speaks, and now it's a person. He seems now to be conversing with it. Okay, so this E is the marker of the applicative. Conversing is an intransitive concept. Converse, right? Can only be transitive when you're conversing with somebody. And so this is an associative use of E. Okay, I've got to move along here. And here's an instrumental use. Many of you may be familiar with instrumental applicative constructions. Okay, so what do beneficiaries, associates, and instruments have in common? They all participate in some way in the initiation of the event. They're all what we want to call co-actants. The ergative participant is the primary actant, but the registered or the participant introduced by the applicative marker motivates, acts with, or enables the primary act. Conclusion. We've shown that the grammar of Waray provides speakers with tools for expressing fine nuances of control and effect. Conceptual semantic transitivity is an insightful way of unifying and explaining a wide range of constructions of Waray. We've gone very quickly through detransitive constructions, two kinds of applicative constructions. This is like central to the grammar of Waray. Future planned research includes a detailed discourse study of the use of these forms, and we'd like to claim that the transitivity approach goes a long way for making shoes that fit Philippine languages, using a metaphor provided by our good friend and colleague Ricardo Velasco, rather than trying to make Philippine languages fit shoes designed for other types of languages. So thank you very much.